Having spent nearly 7 years as the Chief Executive of the UK's Food and Drink Federation, Ian Wright has been well placed to experience the highs and lows of the industry during that time. We speak to him about some key events, including Brexit, the impacts of COVID, and looking ahead to the rest of 2022 as to how the industry might recover from the challenges faced over the past couple of years. But just on a personal level, how much are you going to miss your role now after 6-7 years there?
Hugely. I mean, I will miss it enormously. It's been the most enjoyable and fulfilling part of my, God, this makes me sound unbelievably old, but I've been at work for 40 years. And first of all, as a student union president, then working in politics, sabbatical, paid for student union president, then working in politics for 5 or 6 years, then working in communications from 1985 till 2000, so 15 years, and then working for Diageo in a number of across a number of fields, pretty much in the same job for 14 years. So I've had sort of 5, 15 years, and now 7 years at 6.5, 6.75 at the FDF. And this has been by far the most fulfilling and enjoyable part of my career. And I think also, I'm very fortunate to work with a increasingly brilliant team, actually. Some fantastic people, very, very supportive members, which is very important in the kind of organisation that I lead at the moment, who have, to some degree, been okay about me going off and doing stuff that might be seen as controversial. So it's been fantastic, and I will miss it terribly. But I also know that this is very definitely the time to go. I mean, I would have gone probably 2 years earlier had it not been for Brexit, and I would probably have gone 1 year earlier if it hadn't been for COVID. And those two have really, you can't leave an organisation like the FDF in the middle of a pandemic. Now, as it turns out, I may have misjudged that timing, but I think we know the frame, we know the kind of, the sort of likely, I doubt if COVID is going to offer any new challenges to the industry. It may recycle some of the ones that we've had before, but I can't really see it being massively different. I mean, there'll always be the choice of, shall we lock people up at home in a lockdown, or shall we let them go out and play? I wish the government would make some other choices in that regard. And it does look to me as though, at the price of vaccine passports, which is a pretty significant incursion into freedoms that some people cherish, I think we are going to see some changes. My one concern about all of that, again, just in square brackets, is I think we have become obsessed with letting the scientists tell us what to do.
About time with the FDF, it's coming to a close now after a very momentous few years with the organisation. So how do you best sum up your time with the FDF, and how do you feel about departing now?
Well, I think it's been a very turbulent time for the industry, and I do think that it's left us with a number of challenges, some of which we might have predicted, some of which I think we didn't predict. I'd say that obviously the one constant theme from, I joined in 2015, and the constant theme from really the middle of 2015 through to today is the effect of, or the effects of the UK's exit from the European Union. And they continue to dog us at the moment. Though I'm not one of those who thinks that they're the main reason for the current supply shortages. But I'll come back to that in a sec. So the EU exit has been a major problem. And just to look at that in detail, to unpack the EU exit, it's been about the uncertainty and distraction of the referendum, the continued uncertainty and distraction after the referendum, but before we started negotiating, In particular, I think there was some quite serious impacts on business planning in the period between 2016 and 2018. And I do think that that was quite an important factor going forward, because my sense is that quite a lot of investment and other thoughts about the long-term future of individual companies got cold storaged from about the middle of 2017. Well, as soon as when Cameron went, which of course wasn't expected, although we now all treat it as though it was the obvious conclusion. I mean, he had said right up till the day before he resigned that he wasn't going to resign. But not, I mean, I'm absolutely not an admirer of David Cameron. I think he was a disaster. But he couldn't say anything else. He couldn't say, well, if this result goes a different way, I shall leave, because that would have encouraged people to vote, to turn it into a vote against him, which, you know, might well have been their wish given austerity. So I think that was caused uncertainty and a lack of investment, and probably a lot of short-termism in the industry in 2017 and 2018 as well. And then you got this prolonged period of all kinds of different positions on what we were or weren't going to negotiate. So one day we were in the customs union, another day we weren't. One day we were going to stay in the single market, another day we weren't. And that period really lasted up until Boris Johnson's election as leader of the Tory party in the summer of 2019, when I think it's from which point the frame of the kind of deal we were going to end up doing became clear. And I think, you know, if I was to say what was the lesson from that, the lesson we should have learned was to assume the absolute most extreme position in terms of the likely outcome of the negotiations, because many of us thought, well, there'll be a degree of mitigation in these negotiations, but there wasn't. And so that's and the consequences of that negotiation, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, you know, signed only a year ago. I mean, that is still with us massively. So there'll be some figures this week, Wednesday, I think, which will show a really, really radical decline in the amount of UK exports, food exports to the EU. And the next stage of this, which is the question of EU imports to the UK, is only going to start with us in 2022 as the new restrictions come in. And I think that will prove to be very challenging as well, particularly on ingredients, not necessarily on finished goods, but on ingredients. Brexit. Then you've got the second big concern that we had at the start of all of this was, you know, my start, 2015, was the whole obesity legislation and what the government was going to do about that. And in that case, there was a bit more of a bit more of a slow burn. We had the sugar tax on soft drinks in 2017 or 2018, and I think that. But we've also had a prolonged period of sort of phony war as the government's gone in and out of its view about, or got more and more determined to go through with changes, then pulled back, Theresa May, and then got a longish period of consideration and then some serious proposals from the Johnson government, many of them driven by his own personal experience of being too overweight when he went into hospital. And those are going to have a big impact, particularly on confectionery, as you know, as the promotional restrictions and advertising changes come in. And then the third big constant has been COVID, which, you know, has been unexpected, unwelcome, and has really changed the shape of the industry. Perhaps not so much for confectionery, because the majority of confectionery is always, the vast majority of confectionery has always been through retail. But in other parts of the industry, you've got massive change, where when we went into the lockdowns in the middle of March last year, the split between retail and hospitality, food to go and contract catering, away from home, if you like, with all the sort of basketed together. That split was 70 retail, 30 away from home. And now, even now, I think it's probably around 80 plus to 20 minus, as it were. So I think it's now the case that fewer than 1 in 5 products by value produced by UK Food and Drink are being sold in out away from home. And that's germane because it does two things. One is a lot of innovation goes on in the hospital, particularly in soft drinks and booze, goes on in the hospitality space and then comes back into retail. And that's been basically walled off for the last 2 years. And then the other thing is, certainly for my members, margins are significantly better in the out of home or away from home sector. And so the power of the retailers has been, and in particular the supermarket retailers, and in brackets, in particular Tesco, have been really consolidated. And I'd say those were the big 3 trends of the last 7 years.
I'm just coming back to Brexit. It's a big topic in itself, and because our title covers not just confectionery, it's snacks and bakery segments.
Yeah.
So do you sense that there might be any recovery to be had from Brexit in terms of the impact that is being wrought on those industries at the moment?
Well, I do think that, I think we shouldn't be, just because it's bad, which it is really bad, doesn't mean we shouldn't be looking for what the opportunities are. And I think there are some significant opportunities, particularly around other countries. I think the trade deals that we have done, the 70 trade deals, which Liz Truss never fails to remind us have been done, are significant but not yet important, but not significant in terms of the overall value of UK trade. But I do think there is in the whole thing about the EU is the whole Brexit or leave kind of narrative about the EU is yesterday and Asia and Latin America are tomorrow. I'm not sure that's literally true. There might be the week after next, but I do think there's something there that is important about the UK has become, certainly the UK food industry has become overly, I think, had become overly focused on the EU and hadn't observed closely enough the opportunities, particularly in China and India, and I would say in Asia more than the other two, more than Africa or Latin America. And I think why I say that is that I think Latin America, unless you're prepared to get in there very quickly and be a big presence, which I would advise, because I think there's some great markets there, you're always going to be up against the problem that American businesses regard Latin America as literally as their backyard. Africa's a bit more of a difficult one. Massive populations, very, very fast growing affluence in a number of those areas, although you do have the same problem that you have in India, where you've got in many African countries. Nigeria would be a good example. You've got a very large group of people who've got a lot of disposable income, but that group is actually a very small proportion, or a small proportion or a minority proportion of the much larger country. So I think if you're doing business with India, it's important to remember that there are, whatever it is, I think 400 million middle class, but of course there's a 1.6 billion population. And ditto in Nigeria, where there are probably 20 million people who are very affluent, but that's part of a population that we know is called at 160, 180 million, but is probably nearer 200 million.
Sure. No, thank you for that. And just coming back there to one of the issues that you touched upon a moment ago, in terms of logistics, which has been causing a real headache at the moment with delivery drivers and the just-in-time delivery framework there. It's an issue that you've touched upon and indeed campaigned regarding in recent months and last year or two. Do you sense that might be moving in the right direction, or still big challenges ahead on that?
Well, the simple answer to your first question is no. But I do think it stopped moving in the wrong direction. So I think there are a series of distinctions I would draw in saying it's not getting any worse, but it's not getting any better. I think, first of all businesses have learned to a greater or lesser extent to deal with very significant disruptions in the supply chain. And those disruptions can be, they can be sort of characterized as labour force disruptions, i.e. there aren't enough people to do whatever it is you do. And I see a lot of this from our members, where pretty large numbers of, I think just about every business, maybe one or two are exempt, but very many businesses are seriously short of workers in terms of the shifts that they have to run. So I know one business very well, a friend of mine runs it down in the West Country. I mean, he's got 400 workers, and he's regularly 40 short for each shift. And that is constraining by a very significant amount his ability to produce product. And he reckons he's losing £500,000 a month in orders that he would be able to get out of the door by not having those people. So he's not actually losing money on his P&L, but he's missing opportunities. And on a business of his size, which I guess is, I don't know, actually 20, 25 million turnover, probably a bit more than that, maybe 30. His lost orders are worth about 6 million. So that's 20% of his potential revenue. And that 20% figure is quite important, because it does seem to be the common thread between service levels in supermarkets all the way through to the similar kind of figure of orders that don't turn up in hospitality. So I said there were some distinctions. Sorry, just to go back to that point, 1 in 5 orders not turning up is why I say the just-in-time principle's crumbling, because the whole point of just-in-time is that 98.7 or whatever % of stuff is there all the time. So let's just sort of unpack that a bit. So the distinctions I'd make are big companies are better at, big companies or well-invested companies are better at coping with this than smaller companies, and they've found ways around. I think supermarkets are probably better at this than anyone else in terms of managing their logistics and their supply chain upstream. The only thing I would say about that is one of the ways they do manage it is by covering on shelf with products that are in profusion, available in profusion, rather than necessarily substituting equivalent food and drink products. So where you once saw whatever it is, that crisps that are in short supply, now you will see Lynx deodorant. And it's that sort of very clever stuff that I think is important. So big companies rather than small companies, I think supermarkets rather than other retailers. And I think in the pub trade, the way this has been covered is by shorter menus, fewer specials, and sadly, differential openings. So hospitality and food to go have often not been open at less high traffic times. So I mean, they're not open Monday to Wednesday, or they're only open lunchtime. So I noticed, rather to my shock, when was it? It was Wednesday of last week. I was out in central London, and we were going to, I was trying to get booked, I was going to be out in central London with a mate for lunch, and he wanted a steak. So I was trying to book Hawksmoor. And he needed to be near Piccadilly Circus Station. Hawksmoor Piccadilly was closed Monday to Wednesday for lunch. Okay. Gaucho, the sort of competitor chain, was open. Gaucho was absolutely rammed. And I'm completely convinced that was because Hawksmoor was closed. Now, maybe that's a sensible division of labour, but it's very clear that many people who are running those sorts of businesses simply don't have the wherewithal to bring to bear to keep the thing going. And I think those, so is it getting better? No, and that is a bad sign for those who cannot cannot sort of some way cover the actual staff shortages, which I suspect are worse I think they're worse in hospitality than they are anywhere else.
And thank you. Just in terms of businesses from the sector we represent, or confectionery, bakery and snacks, have you been impressed by those that you encountered in terms of your members that are within our segment?
Oh yeah, I mean, look, I'm from very long ago. I worked in communications and advice I did 2 years for Mars in the 80s, working for them as a advisor on their communications and government affairs stuff, both in the UK and in Saudi Arabia. And I loved working for Mars. I thought it was a fantastic business. And some of the people I work with have gone on to greater things, Alan Layton and Justin King and Andy Thingett, what's his name, the guy who used to run Boots. I mean, they were all there when I was there, or I was there when they were all there. And I would say Mars, Mondelez, Ferrero, General Mills, all remain very significant businesses, other confectionery businesses, of course, as well. And then we have one thing you may not have noticed is that FDF has become the fulcrum of representation of the baking industry, because we have the Federation of Bakers, the Association of Bakery Ingredients Manufacturers, the craft bakers, all together under the FDF umbrella. So, organisations like Warburton's and Allied Bakeries and a whole rate Fine Lady and all of those businesses are very significant to our work and to and I think they show themselves. Bakery, I mean, the interesting thing about the only thing that I've not seen remarked on as much as it should have been is the resurgence of bread during the lockdown. Baking it, eating it, making sandwiches out of it has been a real winner for those businesses, although less for the food to go people like Pret and so on. So that's been very important. And the snack business continues to grow, and probably the most innovative sector we've got, from vegan bars, breakfast bars and so on. It's very fun.
Following on from that, how hopeful are you that, given the challenges that we've discussed, that there will be a picture of recovery and bounce back in the new year and times ahead?
Well, I think I'm convinced of the long-term exciting prospects for UK food and drink, and in particular your sector, confectionery, snacks, bakery. I think there's a huge sector, a huge opportunity there. I also think that, if it is the case that we're going to, I think it depends a lot on how we come to live with COVID, because we are going to have to do that. Whatever happens, we're going to have to live with this disease, and it will either become, as many predict, over a period of time, less concerning for us, but more something we take in our stride on an everyday basis. And that may mean that we have to vaccinate once a year, or it may mean that we have to test every day or whatever. And I think those trade-offs have been really serious. But one of the things I think that will mean is that at some point we will have a choice, but we ought to have a proper conversation about where we work and how we work. And those choices will inform some of the things that you're asking about where do we buy our food, what do we eat, particularly at lunchtime, and when we go out in the evenings. And those sorts of choices will be very crucial. But whatever we choose in the way we live with COVID, I think we're going to see a very vibrant food industry, because once it's out of the bottle, I think that this industry is crucial to our national well-being. and that food is a matter of national security, then, and it becomes a matter of national policy concern as much as defence or health, or to which it's of course closely linked, I think then there's no way of putting it back. And in a way, that is something we have achieved. That, you know, there's no way food can go down the agenda now.